The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the overhead fluorescent light. Jason adjusted the collar of his jacket as he sat in the cold, sterile waiting room. His fingers tapped nervously against the armrest of the plastic chair, a sound that echoed too loudly in the empty space. Outside, the rain was falling heavily, the soft thuds of raindrops on the window adding to the tension that seemed to hang in the air like a thick fog. It was supposed to be an ordinary night, an evening spent watching a film, unwinding from the stress of the week. But this wasn't just any film. This was a new release, an underground horror thriller titled Who Dares Wins. Jason had heard whispers about it, about how it was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The tagline alone had intrigued him. Who dares wins, but some challenges have a price. He had no idea what to expect, only that it was the kind of movie that promised something real, something deeper than the typical jump-scare horror. The theater was nearly empty when the film began, just a few other patrons scattered in the darkened room. Jason settled in, the dimming lights sinking him into the vast, uncomfortable darkness. The screen flickered to life and the opening sequence began. An unassuming suburban house, quiet, still. The camera panned over the yard where a group of friends gathered, laughing and joking, each holding a drink in hand. At first, the film felt like any other. It followed a group of friends embarking on a weekend getaway. The usual setup, games, jokes, friendly dares. But as the evening progressed, something began to feel off. The house, a large old manor nestled deep in the woods, seemed more like a character than just a backdrop. There was something ancient about it, its creaking floors and flickering lights, almost as if the house were alive, watching the group. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the tension slowly built. The friends, eager to outdo each other in daring challenges, began pushing boundaries. One by one, they entered a small, musty room in the house, a room that hadn't been touched in years. Inside, there was an old chest. The film didn't explain much, but Jason's eyes were glued to the screen as each person hesitated, unsure whether to open it. But the dare was too tempting, and one by one they opened it, each drawing a slip of paper from inside. What was on those slips? A dare, a challenge, a game. The camera zoomed in on the protagonist, Mark, as he drew the last slip. It was blank. Confused, he showed it to the others, who laughed it off. But Jason could sense something wasn't right. He leaned forward, his breath shallow, his eyes locked on the screen. Who dares wins, the voice on the film echoed. But this time, it wasn't just part of the narrative. It felt like something from within the room. Jason looked around the theater. No one was speaking, but the whisper felt real, like it was coming from somewhere behind him. The group in the film continued their game, escalating the dares with each round. The challenges grew increasingly dangerous and reckless, but none of them seemed to notice. The house seemed to tighten its grip around them, the walls groaning as if protesting each step. And then a moment of pure silence. Mark, the protagonist, picked up the final slip, his eyes widening. This time, the slip wasn't a dare. It was an ultimatum. The screen flickered and went black. The theater plunged into total darkness. Jason's heart raced, his senses heightened. His hand instinctively reached for the armrest, gripping it tight. The silence was deafening now, every sound amplified, every breath too loud. Then the screen blinked back to life. The images that flashed across the screen were no longer part of the film. They were real. They were images of the theater itself, the seats, the rows, his row. A chill ran down his spine. Suddenly, he felt it, a cold, clammy hand brushing his shoulder. He spun around, expecting to see someone sitting behind him, but the seats were empty. His breath caught in his throat. Something was wrong. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, stretching out, becoming something darker, more sinister. The screen flashed again, showing the friends from the film now trapped in the house. They were panicking, running through the hallways, knocking over furniture. A voice, deep, guttural, whispered in the darkness, "Who dares, wins." Jason's blood ran cold. He wasn't sure if the voice had come from the screen, the room, or his own mind. But he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a movie anymore. The game had come to life. The rules were set, and there was no way out. The air in the theater grew thick, stifling. Jason tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't move. The shadows around him seemed to grow longer, closer. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening, but the more he thought, the less he understood. The film had drawn him in, sucked him into its world, and now, like the characters on screen, he was part of it. The house in the film was now the theater, the room, his reality. And the challenge was clear. He had to win, or else he would be trapped forever. Suddenly, the screen went black again, and for a brief moment, the entire theater was plunged into darkness. A door creaked open behind him. Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He dared not turn around. He didn't want to know what was there. When the lights flickered back to life, the film had ended. The credits rolled. Jason sat in his seat, motionless, his body cold with sweat. His heart still pounded in his chest. The theater was quiet, but something was still lingering in the air. A presence. He slowly stood up, his legs weak, his mind racing. The aisle before him stretched into darkness, as though the end of the theater was miles away. With a trembling hand, he reached for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The knob didn't turn. Then a voice, low and familiar, whispered in his ear, "Who dares, wins." And as the lights flickered out once again, Jason understood. The game had only just begun.